So Sam, welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Brian. So before I jump to live demo, I have a couple of follow-up PowerPoint slides just to set the stage. So for the agenda, I want to give a little bit of background. We're going to talk through, we're going to show you the SmartView demo, and then we're going to talk a little bit about what it takes to install and enable the features. And then finally, you'll be able to actually answer questions through the WebEx chat. And I'll have a slide that shows you the instructions on that towards the end. So just to clarify, because I'll be referring quite a bit back and forth to the add-in as well as to SmartView, the terms I'm going to be using, so when I say add-in, I'm referring to the legacy Essbase Excel spreadsheet add-in, primarily talking about version 11.1.2, but some of the features are available in older versions as well. And then on the SmartView side, I'm specifically referring to the ad-hoc analysis interface through MS Excel. So SmartView is a much broader tool that allows the import of Hyperion data into all MS Office products, including Excel, PowerPoint, Word. You can even import it into Outlook if you want to. A couple of assumptions I want to make sure that everyone, as I'm going through this presentation. The first one is I'm already that there is a familiarity with the legacy Excel add-in, and I want to say legacy. The reality is that I'm sure a fair number of people are still using the Excel add-in. So this presentation is definitely geared who are familiar with it, and in fact, the Excel add-in has really become synonymous with Hyperion Essbase, which is the multi-dimensional database used to slice and dice financial information as well as other metrics. In addition, I'm assuming that there is at least a little bit of familiarity with SmartView. So this presentation is not an introduction to SmartView, but really it's comparing and contrasting the SmartView against Essbase versus the Excel add-in. And I really think that you guys are going to be excited about some of the content I'm showing. So let me just throw out this first question right here, which some of you may be asking as you're participating in this presentation. Why would you want to switch from the Excel add-in to SmartView? As I mentioned before, the Excel add-in has been a tool that's been around for over 10 years now. It's synonymous with Essbase, and for most financial analysts, it's an indispensable part of their financial toolbox. From IT's perspective, I think it makes a lot of sense to switch to SmartView. It's one less program that IT has to support, and SmartView actually allows deployment through Workspace. So it's very streamlined, and they put a lot of development time into making it very easy to install SmartView clients on local workstations. In addition, and this is IT folks, there are some documented conflicts between the Excel add-in, and as a result. Oftentimes, to support end users, the end users are requested to disable one or the other. From a system administrator perspective, and this is really the person who administers the system from a day-to-day basis, similar argument, it's one less tool that they have to train users on. I would argue that the SmartView GUI is more intuitive and easier to navigate around than the Excel add-in, especially for folks who are not familiar with both tools. And this is something that I want some of the system admins to focus on. There are new features that will really help with doing basic administrative functions. So I think this is going to be really exciting. And finally, for the end users, there is a benefit. It's one less tool that they have to learn. And the integration with PowerPoint and Word for other features of SmartView are very compelling. But, and this is what we want to address today, for those Excel add-in powers, they need to be able to do everything that the Excel add-in does. I myself, and again, this goes a little bit into why I'm passionate about this topic. So I myself have used the Excel add-in for over 10 years in corporate finance, mostly in an FP&A function. So it's an indispensable part of my life, especially when I do financial analysis, to slice and dice and do ad hoc retrievals. In addition, when I was administering and owning systems, I used the Excel add-in extensively to troubleshoot cubes, whether it was data loads or calculation issues or trying to tie out data between two different cubes. The Excel add-in was the primary tool that I used for analysis. And I believe that this applies to a lot of folks on the call, I did try using SmartView. I tried using SmartView when it was first released with Planning version 4. I tried it again with 9.3. I tried it yet again with 11.1.1.3 and never really could fully adopt it. So I ended up going back to the Excel add-in. But I'm happy to say that I'm a recent convert, and my goal during this presentation is to do the same for you guys. So really quickly, before I jump straight into the demo, just a quick list of the features that I'm going to highlight here. So I'm going to show you guys the new dialogue, zoom-in features, and then just kind of I'm going to highlight some of the new features such as multi-grid retrieve and member information, which I'm really excited about. So without further ado, I'm going to do our lab environment and show you the Excel add-in. Exciting, isn't it? This is the that was introduced with version 11. So hopefully this looks familiar to you. And as I mentioned before, it's a nice graphical interface right here, and it shows a lot of recently used connections that I have. So if you'll recall in the add-in, it's a drop-down that shows the list of servers. So again, just a lot more information to take advantage of the real estate on your screen. So I'm going to go ahead and connect. And one of the first things you'll notice when I connect is that it pulls up a ad hoc retrieval that looks a lot like the Excel add-in. In SmartView, in the prior releases, it always started out with the point of view panel, which looks as such. So they haven't removed it, but what they've done is they've given a toggle. So by default, it gives you that same add-in look and feel. One of the nice features I like about is that in the past, if you'll recall, you couldn't actually get rid of this point of view. This point of view, the best you could do is get it to the point where all the dimensions pulled into the sheet right here. But now with the toggle, as I showed you, you can put all of the dimensions here and not have that floating window here. So I like that feature, and I'll get back to the point of view a bit later. So let me dive into some of the features that I'm sure you guys are really concerned about or interested about or have complained about in the past. The big one is the zoom-in functionality. So if you think about it, the Excel, as far as slicing and dicing, the fundamental feature of slicing and dicing is the zoom-in behaviors. And while the SmartView add-in had always allowed to double-click and zoom in, zoom out, or zoom level, it didn't provide the exact same functionality that the add-in had. And one of the primary limitations was the ability to zoom in on a range. And what I mean by that is you could always go in one at a time, but what you couldn't do is you couldn't highlight a range and zoom in across the board. So let me just back up and show you guys this again, but let me drop in a little bit of data as well. So again, I can highlight a range now, and I can go in and I can zoom in. So the other range functions such as keep only or remove only are also available using ranges. So this was a very important feature that was not available in older versions of SmartView. Another thing that you may have noticed, and I want to highlight this, is that the zoom in button on the ribbon now has a little arrow here, and I don't want to I don't want you guys to miss this particular feature. So let me go back in here. This actually allows you to do all of your zoom-in features right from the ribbon. So in the past, you could level the next level, all level, or bottom levels, but the only way you could control this feature was through the options. So you could click zoom in, but if I wanted to zoom in to a next level, and it was set this way, it would work fine. But let's say that in my next retrieve, or my next zoom in rather, I wanted to zoom in at the bottom level. In the past, I actually had to go into the options. I had to change my zoom in level here to bottom level, and then I would zoom in. Now, all of that behavior can be controlled straight from the ribbon. I can zoom straight from the bottom level here, or if I didn't want to do that, I can just zoom in to the next level. So again, this is a really well thought out feature that they put into the new version. Another thing that you may have caught in this drop down is that in addition to next level, all levels, and bottom level, there's the ability to zoom into the same level, sibling level, and same generation, as well as formulas. These four features were not available in SmartView in prior versions, but are now available in the latest version. And you may have recognized these features because they've been available all along in the Excel add-in. Additionally, another zoom-in feature that was really handy and often used was the formula fill feature. So sometimes, as you were navigating along, you wanted to have your own formula. Let me do this at the total expense level. So here I'm just going to have a percentage of budget formula. And in the past, when you used SmartView, you could zoom in and it would retain the formula, but it wouldn't necessarily fill it in. And this is a feature that was available in the Excel add-in. If I go to options, you'll now see that formula fill is an available option. So when I zoom in, it will actually fill that particular formula throughout the zoom. Again, I think that this is one that was absolutely indispensable as part of your ad hoc analysis. Another feature that they've actually enhanced, not only in this latest version, but throughout the versions of SmartView, was the ability to preserve formatting. So I'm going to go ahead and open up a pre-formatted retrieve. And I'm going to so you'll notice that when I hit retrieve, it didn't change the format. I'm going to go to the member selection, and I'm going to change the selection, hit retrieve. Again, doesn't impact the formatting. And most importantly, when you go to your formatting options and you retain your Excel formatting, when I zoom in, it's intelligent about how it retains, so it leaves the totals alone, but it doesn't apply the formatting to the zoomed in area. So in the past, you would get inconsistent results when you zoomed in. Oftentimes it would either clear out or incorrectly apply formatting. So again, you can zoom in. It leaves the totals alone. And then a nice little feature about SmartView is you can actually undo a couple of times. So if I inadvertently blew up my nice formatted report with a couple of clicks of the undo, I'm back to my starting point. Of course, the safest way is just to close out the spreadsheet and not hit save. Okay. Another really useful ad hoc feature, this may seem like a minor one, but again, it's very handy in doing analysis, was the ability to show members and aliases on the same line. So right now, and this was available in older versions of SmartView, you had the option for member names, which in this case is a representative of what an Oracle GL account would look like, or a default alias. In the options, you now have the ability to put both the member name and alias, so that when I hit retrieve, side by side, it shows your member name as well as your alias. And you can see how this could be a practical application if you're trying to figure out an Oracle GL account and you don't quite recall what the descriptive name was. So again, I think from ad hoc perspective, really useful feature. Finally, and I'm going to return to my formatted sheet here. Okay. Thank you. So oftentimes, in the same workbook, you will have a retrieval where you want to maintain formatting, but another retrieval where you want to go in and do ad hoc analysis where, perhaps you'll want to have both the member and name and alias displayed, or perhaps you'll want to have suppression on. In the older version of SmartView, your options applied across the board to every single tab in your spreadsheet. In the Excel add-in, you actually had the ability to save certain options, including formatting options, your suppression options, and your zoom-in behavior. You were able to save those options at a sheet level. This functionality has been reintroduced in the latest version of SmartView. So as you can see, I've actually got some data suppressed here, so let me put in. So you'll see I'm able to retrieve and have suppressed data here, whereas in this particular case, I'm going to set the options, make sure that suppression isn't on, and make sure that the formatting is left alone. You'll see that in this particular case, the suppression isn't enabled, but it leaves my formatting alone. Again, suppression on, suppression off. So hopefully this gives you a pretty good level of confidence that the latest version of the SmartView add-in does everything that the Excel add-in needed to do, and really took care of the shortcomings that folks had been complaining about over the years. But wait, there's more. I want to kick it up a notch and show you some of the new features that really put this particular version of SmartView over the top. So let me close out the spreadsheet and again go to a new blank tab. So as I mentioned before, when you first log into SmartView and you do a retrieve, similar to the add-in, it drops all of your members to the tab, all of the dimensions needed to do a query. There is a toggle to be able to toggle between the point of view panel and having everything on the tab. For some users, I think that the point of view is actually a really useful tool. You were able to dock it into your window, which for larger monitors worked up top, or even to the side, where in some cases it makes a lot of sense because it makes for easier navigation. But with that said, one of the things that I personally didn't like about the point of view window was that you actually had to go in and use member selection to change your entries. What they've done now, and you may have noticed this, is they've actually allowed this particular dialog to be editable. So I can type in actual, I can type in FY 2012, I can hit refresh, and I can navigate and leverage the point of view dialog here. In addition, if I know all of the selections that I want, I can type each one of them in. So I can type in budget, I can add forecast, and you'll notice now that all those drop-downs are here. So now I've got more of a interactive type drop-down that is a bit more user-friendly. Let me show you and I'm going to pause and go through a couple of examples here because this is really probably the hottest feature that you guys will see here. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to query a different database. I'm going to highlight a range and I'm going to do some analysis. And I'm going to use a feature here called Multigrid ad-hoc. What Multigrid ad-hoc does, not only does it allow you to connect to different databases on the same tab and retrieve against those databases, but it actually allows you to navigate without having to highlight a range. So what you'll notice here, connected to two different databases. I'm connected to the revenue cube up top, and I'm connected to the OpEx cube below. And what I'm actually building out is a very rudimentary P&L with the revenue, cost of sales, and gross margin sourced from one cube, and then my operating expenses sourced from a different cube. So in the past, the only way to do something even similar to this was to try and build something out in financial reports. This is now available through the ad-hoc. So I think that's a pretty cool feature, but let me show you an even better application here. So let's say that I'm looking at my operating expense data, and I'm just going to focus in on Q2. And in this particular application, I'm going to compare the data from this operating expense cube with, let's say, an operating expense cube that's from a planning application. So the planning application has similar account structure. However, it's got dimensions. And for you admins, I think you guys are seeing where I'm going with this. What I can now do is I can look side by side to figure out how to tie out data. So it looks like even at the account level, things aren't tying out. But let me zoom in, say at the region level. So I can see that some of my regions are tying, but in the Americas, I was getting a delta. So let me investigate further. It looks like Canada's okay, so let me investigate even further. I think I'm getting close. Sure enough, in my reporting application, I have numbers in New York, but in my planning application, it looks like those numbers are blank. So now I can go into whatever calculation process or data load process and further troubleshoot this. Finally, let me show features that I think are nice touches to this version of the SmartView add-in. You'll notice in the Essbase box that in addition to member selection, there's a box here called Member Information. What Member Information does is it actually gives you all the information about a particular member, including any aliases, the level number, generation number, the storage information, so whether stored or dynamic calc member, and just pretty much anything you can think of is in this dialog box. For those of you guys who are in VBA and the spreadsheet toolkit, this member information function is also available there as well. So there's a lot of functionality that's introduced in this SmartView add-in. Another feature that I wanted to show, and this is one that I don't know that I would personally use all that often, but is pretty interesting. So you guys are familiar when you do a retrieve that you have a standard format. So you have a row, your page selection, you've got column headers, and then you've got account headers. With this latest version, you can actually change that format around a little bit. So I can flip it, I can continue to zoom, and it recognizes things. I can even put the accounts right in between. So this would be an example of a butterfly report. Oops. I went a little crazy there. Let me see if I can get my accounts back. There we go. All right. So let me switch back to the PowerPoint and just talk through one more slide here. So you guys might be asking yourself, all these features look great. We get this implemented into our system. So there's two things that need to happen. The first thing is that you actually need to install a server-side patch on your Essbase server. The version that we're demoing here is Essbase 11.1.2.1 version 1.02, and then that same version to be applied to every single client. But as I mentioned before at the beginning of my presentation, SmartView is actually deployed via Workspace. So if you have the latest version of Workspace installed, you can actually deploy your SmartView client that way as opposed to having to distribute an installer. And if you're not running Essbase 11.1.2, we do have consulting services that will allow you to go in and upgrade from say version 9.3 or even version 7 to 11.1.2 without having to invest a lot of time rebuilding. Okay, so with that, I'm going to open up the chat window to questions, and I will go ahead and do my best to answer them. Okay, I am getting a number of questions here, so if you bear with me, I will walk through them. So the first question, which is forward one, is whether or not you can display multiple alias tables or just the default one. So if you looked in my demo here, and I don't have this set up, when you change alias, you have the ability to select other alias tables besides the default alias table. And the nice feature about the latest version of SmartView is that regardless of which alias table you have selected, the spreadsheet or the system is actually smart enough to recognize it. So let me give a specific example here. Let's say that you've got salary expense, and then maybe you've got a long alias called 6000-salary expense. Even if you don't have that particular alias table selected, you can still do a retrieve with the member name, or sorry, the alias name 6000-salary expense. It'll recognize it and it'll query the right member. So they made that pretty intelligent. Okay, the next question I've got is around the query right here. So let me go in here. So I am not going to actually show the query designer, but what the query designer really is meant to do is for people who aren't very sophisticated in building out ad hoc queries. It allows for sort of a graphical way to construct a query. So, it shows you what your column options are, and then if you click on the button, it'll allow you to pick via member selection what columns to select. Same thing with accounts. It will use this member selection dialog to help you pick the ins and outs of what you want. And then finally, from a point of view, this functionality is actually no different than the point of view bar. Okay, so hopefully that kind of gives you a very, quick highlight of what the query designer does. Personally, I think that once you get familiar with the Excel add-in, you tend not to use the query designer nearly as much. Question about the performance of the add-in. I do believe that it performs just as fast as the add-in. I don't have extensive experience with it benchmarking side by side, but I haven't noticed any material differences. So hopefully that answers your question. Certainly, I've been able to use SmartView to do ad hoc analysis. Okay. So question about add to the point of view. One thing I want to highlight, the features here with the point of view. Go to a new query here. So the ability to toggle the point of view and a lot of the other features of code, including the ability to type in a different member. This is only available in the latest of SmartView, and you need to apply both the client patch and the server. If you apply the client patch and you try and connect to 11.1.2 or older version of Essbase that isn't version 102, in some cases the functionality won't work the same, and I'm talking specifically about the point of view. So if you type in actual and I'm not connected to the 102 Essbase server, it'll actually return an error. So for that reason, some of the other features that I showed you, including the ability to do multi-grid analysis, our recommendation is that you only install this latest version of the client when you have your Essbase servers updated to the latest patch as well. Okay, so falling a little behind on these questions here, can bear with me. Okay, so we're looking for let's see. There's a question on distributing the SmartView clients. So as I mentioned before, SmartView can now be installed via Workspace. Let me see if I can go into a Workspace URL here. I don't have a URL available. So what you do is when you log in, and I don't have a screenshot, so I apologize for this. There is a drop-down menu where you can pull in, select install, and then select install SmartView. and it's really just a wizard-based install. So for people who have deployed either planning or HF, they should be fairly familiar with Workspace. That's the primary engine in deploying SmartView. You can also the installer, which is just a double-click installer as well. Okay. There's a question about the default point of view. I know one of the points with older versions of SmartView was the fact that you had a nice, you'd set up your point of view, and oftentimes you'd spend 5 minutes even, trying to get everything all set up nicely. There is a way, even in older versions of SmartView, to retain this point of view so that when you go from notebook to notebook, it will actually save the point of view off, and you don't have to spend time resetting this. So that is available in older versions. One trick that I think is really handy with this version of SmartView is because of the toggle, you can actually set up your point of view here on the spreadsheet similar to the Excel add-in, and then just toggle it back into the point of view. I think that this is a really quick way of accomplishing what you're looking for. So hopefully that answers that particular question. Okay. I have a question about the multi-retrieve. So I guess technically you can retrieve against the same cube multiple times. So let me see if I can demo this here. So yes, I am now navigating in the same place in 2 grids. And again, I think this multi-grid feature is probably, at least from my perspective, it's the one that I'm the most excited about, because the only alternative was to do queries on different tabs, which wasn't always practical. Or if you were rich enough, I guess you could do queries on 2 different computers sitting side by side. So I think that this feature is really compelling. There's a question about large retrievals. I do know I've run into an issue where when you do a large retrieval, it limits you as to the number of rows you can pull back. And I think the IT guys will actually be pretty excited about this. There's a setting now that allows you to basically regulate the number of rows that are returned with SmartView. And the reason why I say that the IT guys should be excited about this is I can't tell you how many times as an administrator I've had my Essbase system hung up because some user decided that they wanted to query 60,000 or 100,000 rows from an Essbase cube. And because the server couldn't handle it, it basically hung up the entire system for all users. So there is a function now in the controls to regulate the number of rows that will get returned. And I think the default is which I ran into when I was playing around with this add-in. But you can certainly up it to support your users. All right. Let me see if I can. Can we do a quick time check, Jeanette? Is there any other?
I think we're getting close to the end of the session.
Let me try and tackle a couple more questions, and I apologize. I'm getting enough questions here where I don't think I can address them in the time allotted. So as far as installing via Workspace, the way that the works now with Oracle is that it is named user licenses, but SmartView, and shoot, I should have Brian jump in for this. SmartView is really bundled in with planning and Essbase, so I don't think that there is a separate license for SmartView outside of your Essbase or planning purchase.
Okay. Sam, you want to take one more question?
Sure. I actually had one last question I wanted to highlight here. Well, actually, I don't think that. So one of the things that you may have caught, and I don't have an example here, but one of the features that's available with Essbase is a feature called Essbase clustering, or high availability. And this feature was introduced a while back. What it allowed administrators to do was it actually allowed them to associate multiple databases with a cluster, so that an end user could go in, point to a cluster, call it an OpEx cluster, and depending on which databases were associated with that cluster, the end user would be directed to the appropriate database. The application of this was it allowed for you to calculate a database, take it offline, calculate it, and then bring it back online without the users really knowing. Now, the downside to Essbase clusters, or I don't want to call it a downside, but one of the limitations to the clusters was the fact that it could only be connected via provider services. So the exciting thing about this this SmartView add-in is that it actually uses provider services, which means that you can use this interface to connect to a cluster. So in the past, I've implemented clusters, but because most of my users were using the Excel add-in, it really wasn't an option to use clustering to provide high availability. So this option is now available. And again, I definitely want to encourage you guys to either investigate or contact us if you're interested in trying to implement that. So that's all the content that I have prepared. I guess, Jeanette, are you going to close this out for us?
Yes, please. And can you bring up the slide, please?
Sure.
This is Jeanette Horn with Key Performance Ideas. I just want to thank Sam. Fantastic presentation. Your passion for SmartView shows, Sam. Thank you. If you invested in the demo again, or refer someone else to it, it will be at www.keyperformanceideas.com in the next few days. And we thank you so much for your interest. Feel free to contact us if you have any questions.